Time now for the exchange and a look at women and the U.S. presidency. Joining us live now to discuss this is BlueStack Strategies founder and principal Mara Gillespie and CNN contributor and historian Leah Wright Rigger. Thank you both for being here. Mara, let me start with you because I do want to talk about this issue of abortion rights in the U.S. and why that seemed to be much more popular than Kamala Harris herself. When you look at where abortion rights was actually on the ballot, the 10 states, 8 out of those 10 states, the majority of people voted in favor of abortion rights. But then at the same time, they voted for the man who was responsible for trying to take those rights away. How do you explain that to people?
So I think that there is a large swath of the American public, especially women, who saw that they had the opportunity to enshrine abortion rights by their state with the ballot measures. They were able to do that, but then also look at what is going to be best for their economic and safety and security issues. I think that as a whole, we've talked about this on this program, but in others, about women not being a monolith about one single issue. And when it comes to the economic strife that has been felt across this country, that played into people's hands, I think, as much as anything. And the conversation about safety and security, especially in states like Arizona and Nevada, I think that was also with border protection and border security. That played a part in their vote for Republicans and Donald Trump specifically.
Leah, one of the few things that I would say that Democratic pollsters got right in this election cycle is that turnout was going to be key. And it looked like turnout was lower ultimately than it was 4 years ago. And while the majority of women did vote for Kamala Harris, 53% to Trump's 46%, Biden won 55% of women's votes. 43% went to Trump. So in trying to parse through these numbers, and obviously women don't vote as a monolith, I'm wondering what questions you're asking about why we saw a decrease in the number of women voting for a female candidate and why you think voter enthusiasm and turnout wasn't as high as it was 4 years ago.
So I think, one thing to start with is that actually when you disaggregate across racial lines, the numbers look radically different. Right? Women of color overwhelmingly went for Kamala Harris. White women effectively evenly split their vote between Trump and Kamala Harris. And I don't think we should be surprised about that because that's actually a trend that has held up for the last several presidential elections. But I think when we think about the larger trends about turnout and turnout being slightly down as compared to 2020, we have to actually revisit a conversation that we've been having for essentially the last year, which is that voters are tired. They were tired of their choices. They felt in a lot of ways that they were having a rehash of the 2020 election, that voters were very clear that they wanted some kind of new inspiration. And this is actually why we saw a lot of momentum in the initial weeks after Kamala Harris announced her campaign and then got the Democratic nomination to be president of the United States. There were moments where people felt like she had the energy, perhaps, to be seen as anti-establishment, to be outside of the Democratic Party, because voters were very clear that they did not want Trump versus Biden again. And so I think one of the things that we can point to is that even in an election where it feels like there's been this overwhelming shift to the right, that Donald Trump may look at this and say, I have a mandate from the American people to do whatever I want. It's also clear that the American people are saying very clearly and very loudly that they want something different, that they do not trust establishment politicians. And I would also look at the policy, the way that the policy ballot initiatives shook out during this election, which is that right-wing policies weren't actually didn't do very well on the ballot. And policies that we initially associated with, I think, progressive ideas like abortion rights and reproductive rights ended up doing really well. The other thing that ended up really doing well are initiatives that addressed the economy. So these are things that voters are looking for, in particular, women voters and the larger electorate.
Mara, let me bring you back in because I'm from the UK, and one thing that I do find quite interesting is that, the UK has had 3 British female prime ministers. Certainly one of them only lasted 49 days, but still, and they have all been conservative. Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May, Liz Truss. In fact, just recently, now we have the Conservative Party leader, Kemi Badenoch, who is a black woman, very far to the right, but a black woman nonetheless. And I want to find out from you, just give me your take on this, why the glass ceiling in the US is so much harder to shatter than in Europe. What are your thoughts on that?
It's really hard. And I worked on Capitol Hill for over a decade, and I found on Capitol Hill that misogyny still ran rampant. And so I'm not going to put it all on that, but it's a big factor here. And I've told you both that I am very determined that I will see a woman president in my lifetime. And I still think that that is very viable. It's definitely an option. I think that there were a lot of factors that made it hard for Kamala Harris in how she got into this race, not through a democratic process, but essentially because Joe Biden dropped out. And there wasn't a lot to differentiate her from the Biden-Harris administration. She was still currently in the administration. And so I think there were a lot of factors that went into that really made it difficult for us to succeed in this election. And again, just because she is a woman doesn't mean that every single woman in America was, had to vote for her. And I think that was a lot of the language that was being kind of shoved into people's TV screens and on their airwaves, and just constantly this idea that women would turn out for her in ways that you assumed, and we learned that that's actually not the case. And so I think that there needs to be a better, more holistic approach to galvanizing women to see the benefits of having a woman who can multitask and lead. The peace through strength. I think that that's something that women can do best, and I am hopeful that we will be there, in the near future. But there are a lot of factors that took this opportunity away from us this time around, because not everyone wanted to see a Kamala Harris administration, just based on not knowing what it would look like or if it would look like the last 4 years. And I think that's really what it came down to.
Yeah, Leah, that just has the hallmarks of what we heard following 2016 and the failed Hillary